Hello, and welcome to your lesson on solving quadratic equations by factoring. Before we start, what I want you to realize is the difference between what we've done so far in the unit and what we're about to do. So up until now, we have been dealing with quadratic expressions, such as these: your trinomials, your difference of squares, your common factoring. They are just expressions, and all we've been doing is factoring them. All of that work has been getting us ready to be able to do this, which is now solving quadratic equations. The only difference between a quadratic expression and a quadratic equation is now we have our expression equal to something. So same thing, our trinomials, our difference of squares, our common factoring, but they are now all equal to something. And they're not always equal to 0. You could have an equation like this where it's one quadratic expression equal to another expression. And just like any equation, what we're trying to do is figure out what value of x we could substitute into the equation to make left side equal to right side. In grade 9, you solved linear equations which looked something like this. 4x minus 1 equals 2x plus 3. The way you solve linear equations is very different than the way you solve quadratic equations. Solving linear equations was done using isolation. So what we did here was subtracted 2x from both sides and added 1 to both sides. So that collected the x terms on the left and the constants on the right, then divided both sides by the coefficient of x, and that gave us the answer. To do a check with your left side, right side check, you substituted the 2 into the x in both left side and right side. So the left side was 4 times 2 minus 1, which is 7. The right side is 2 times 2 plus 3, which is 7. So left side equals right side. So that was the solution to our equation. So that was a linear equation. Solving a quadratic equation, and hopefully you know it's quadratic because it has this square, exponent of 2. Solving a quadratic equation is very different than solving a linear equation. In order to solve an equation which is quadratic, there are a couple of skills that you need to be able to do. So what I want you to do is to pause the video and complete these two activities, A and B, and when you are done, press play and you'll see the answers. So pause the video and complete activities A and B. Okay, welcome back. In activity A, hopefully you got the idea here that in order for two things to be multiplied by each other, at least one of them has to equal 0. There is no way that you can multiply two things together to make 0 without at least one of them equaling 0. That's the first idea. The second idea is you have to be able to solve these linear equations, which is just isolating the variable. If you had difficulties with either activity A or activity B, please make note of it and ask your teacher for help the next day. I'm now going to bring you through the process of how to solve a quadratic equation. There are many different strategies for solving quadratic equations. The first one that you will be learning is solving by factoring. The other strategies you will be learning in the next unit. The very first step to be able to solve an equation by factoring is not to put the x's on the left and the numbers on the right, but to put all the terms on the left side. That means you have to subtract x squared from both sides, and you have to add 5 to both sides. So that means your expression becomes x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0. So everything goes onto one side of the equation, typically the left, and 0 is left on the right side. The second step is to determine which type of factoring you have here. Since there are 3 terms, the first term is x squared, the second term is an x, and the third term is a constant. There's no number in front of the x squared. That is a simple trinomial factoring. So you are looking for 2 numbers that multiply to give you 5 and add to give you 6. So that's your m and your n. And the 2 numbers that multiply to 5 and add to 6 are 5 and 1. So to factor that simple trinomial, you have x plus 5 in the first bracket and x plus 1 in the second bracket. And because this is an equation, do not forget to put that equals 0 at the end. The next step is to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. From the activity we did on the previous page, we said if you multiply 2 things to give 0, then the only way for that to happen is if either the first factor is 0 or the second factor is 0. So this is your first factor. So that means x plus 5 has to equal to 0. This is your second factor, or x plus 1 has to equal 0. By looking at the first factor, this will equal 0 if we subtract 5 from both sides, which makes x equal to negative 5. So if x was equal to negative 5, the first term would be 0, the second term would be negative 4. 0 times negative 4 is 0. For the second set of brackets, if you subtract 1 from both sides, that means x is equal to negative 1. If you substituted negative 1 in, the first bracket would be 4, the second bracket would be 0. 4 times 0 is 0. Once again, we have found a value of x that makes the left side equal to the right side. You could always check your answers using a left side, right side check. So for x equals negative 5, you have negative 5 plus 5 times negative 5 plus 1. That's 0 times negative 4, which is 0, and the right side is equal to 0. So the negative 5 works. For the negative 1, you have negative 1 plus 5 times negative 1 plus 1, which is 4 times 0, which is 0. Right side is 0. Left side equals right side. So that means that both of these are solutions to the equation. Quadratic equations will produce 2 solutions most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. You'll see some different instances where there won't be 2 solutions. So I know that's a lot to absorb at first and it gets confusing. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 4 more examples together, and then you're going to get a chance to try some examples on your own. So example number 1. We already have all terms on the left side and 0 on the right side, so we're ready to decide on our factoring strategy. 2 terms, both perfect squares, so this is a difference of squares. By now, you are expected to be able to do your factoring. If you are not able to do your factoring, you should be coming in for some extra help. Alright, so you factor your difference of squares. Step 1. Step 2. You take your first term, set it equal to 0. You take your second term, set it equal to 0. Next step, solve each of these equations for x. So for here, subtract 3 from both sides. So you get x equals -3. For this one here, add 3 to both sides. That means you get x equals +3. And there are your two solutions. So, all terms on the left, 0 on the right. Factor using your proper factoring strategy. Set each factor equal to 0. Solve each factor. That's example 1. Example 2. We don't have all terms on the left, so we're going to subtract 6x from both sides. So that gives us 8x squared minus 6x equals 0. Since there's nothing left on the right side, it equals 0. The factoring strategy here is common factoring. Once again, you're expected by now to know your factoring strategies. The common factor that can be taken out here is a 2x, and you are left with 4x minus 3. Next step, take the first factor, set it equal to 0. Take the second factor, set it equal to 0. Last step, solve each for x. In this case, because this is 2 times x, there's no constant being added or subtracted. You're just dividing both sides by 2. So that means x equals 0. In this one here, you're going to add 3 to both sides. And then you're going to divide both sides by 4. And those are your two solutions. Example 3. We have everything on the left, 0 on the right, so we can decide on our factoring strategy. That is a tricky trinomial. So the numbers that multiply to give you -4 and add to give you 3 are 4 and -1. So decomposition, 2x squared plus 4x minus 1x minus 2 equals 0. Common factor the first two terms. Common factor the last two terms. And your final answer is x plus 2 times 2x minus 1. Set each factor equal to 0. First factor is x plus 2. Second factor is 2x minus 1. Subtract 2 from both sides. Subtract 1 from both sides. Divide both sides by 2. And there are your two answers. Now we're about to run out of time on this video, so I'm going to end this video, and it's going to continue with part 2 of the video, where I will complete question 4, and then you'll have a chance to practice 4 questions on your own. So we're not done, don't get excited. This video is going to stop, and it's going to you're going to restart this lesson with part 2 of this video. Thank you.